This week from the global lane, where in the world? Syria. The civil war heats up. People in the border town of Afrin are under attack from NATO member Turkey. As the world remains silent, Kurdish Christians are caught in the crossfire. As the Winter Olympic Games get underway in South Korea, all remains quiet militarily on the Korean peninsula. But for how long? On the home front, Washington reels over FBI memos, warrants, and text messages. Did FBI officials collude against Donald Trump? And what about the Obama White House? We'll talk to investigative journalist David Cay Johnston and the ACLJ's Jordan Sekulow. Our man on the street, Mung Fei Lee, asks, should Christians seek romantic relationships via social media apps? And I'll drive it home about Valentine's Day, why we celebrate, and who first said, all you need is love. And it's all right here, right now, from the global lane. On January 20th, Turkish troops crossed over into Syria and attacked Kurdish rebels and residents in the city of Afrin. Turkish President Erdogan says he wants a 30-kilometer buffer zone along the Syrian border to protect his country against attacks from the Kurdish YPG. That's a group that has helped the U.S. in the fight against ISIS. Now, some of the residents of Afrin attacked by the Turks and their Syrian allies are Christian. Joining us with more from Beirut is Pastor Nahad from Afrin. Pastor Nahad, you're in constant contact with friends and relatives in Afrin. What are they saying is happening right now in the city?
Before the Turkish invasion of the area, people were living in their villages in peace. Kurds have existed for thousands of years in the area of Afrin. According to the information we have and received, people who are close to the border are afraid because of the random shelling. So they are fleeing to the core of the city of Afrin to be protected as much as possible from the fighting.
Many of the people of Afrin are Kurdish Christians, so tell us about that.
The situation there is so hard, especially for the Christians. In Afrin, there are 190 Christian families. There are also more than 45 families nearby in the area of Mabatli. There are other groups. We were not able to be in contact with them in order to know their numbers. There are a lot of believers who immigrated to Aleppo before the current battles in Afrin. Also, there are more than 10 to 15 Armenian families that have existed in Afrin for a long time, and they are indigenous according to their identifications. Some others immigrated to Canada, Europe, Lebanon, and even Turkey before the beginning of the new war in Afrin.
So how can we help them right now? I understand the city's surrounded. No humanitarian relief is getting through.
We are asking all the international organizations, the UN, the UNICEF, the International Red Crescent, and the International Red Cross to stop this invasion, to be able to bring humanitarian reliefs to people from all the religions. They are in need now for somebody to stand with them as they are displaced and their homes are destroyed. We are asking for help. We as Kurdish Church, which is a group of displaced people who are living in Lebanon, in addition to other churches like the Arabic Church, we are communicating with each other and with some churches in Europe about how can we provide the humanitarian reliefs like milk for babies and medicines for the hospitals and food. The church in Afrin was distributing about 1,300 food baskets before the crisis. But now it's under a lot of pressure. A lot of villages in that area are destroyed, and people need the humanitarian organizations and the UN to care about them. We want our voice to go through the global churches for these organizations to take initiatives to start dealing with us to be able to help our Kurdish people.
You're a pastor of a Kurdish church in Beirut. Many of them are from Afrin, and they still have family and friends there. So how are they responding to this?
We are praying in church and recalling the verses of hope in the Bible, and we meditate about Job and how he gets out of the ordeal, and how the people of the Old Testament get out of the slavery of Pharaoh to worship the Lord freely. We remember all these stories to implant in the souls of our people the hope of salvation when we call the Lord from all our hearts. We do that always in the church.
Why do they think this is happening? What does Turkey President Erdogan really want?
It's known that the devil cometh not but to steal and to kill and to destroy. But the Lord Jesus said, I am come to give you life, and that you might have it more abundantly. The dream of Erdogan is to restore the old glory of the Ottoman state. It controlled the area for 400 years. In those years, they kill a lot of Armenians, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Syriac, and the people of the area, like the civilizations of the Phoenicians and others. The Ottoman state tried to destroy the civilizations, and today we are seeing how they are destroying the Kurdish civilization, which have its own language. We are here on our land for thousands of years, and they are coming now to expel us and make a buffer zone. This is the dream of the devil, to destroy homes and kill and slaughter.
And finally, what should we pray for them and the people of Afrin?
We are asking the global church to lift up the people of the Middle East and the Kurdish people in Syria before the throne of God, for His will to be done in earth as it is in heaven. We ask, instead of the weapons of killing and slaughtering, to stretch our hands in helping each other, and pray as it's written, from every nation and kindred and tongue and people, each one praising God in his tongue. And like in heaven, let it be in Syria and the Middle East, in the name of Jesus Christ.
The 23rd Olympic Winter Games are now underway in South Korea, and last month, a team of North Korean representatives met with their South Korean counterparts. They agreed to participate in the Games and march under one Korean flag at the opening ceremonies. Well, Kim Jong-un is unlikely to launch another ballistic missile test while the Olympics are underway, but what about after the Olympics? Are we to see more to come from the Korean dictator? How should the U.S. respond? Well, joining us with some insights is Counsel on Foreign Relations, Senior Fellow, Korea expert Scott Snyder. Mr. Snyder, how significant is it that North Korea and South Korea are marching at the Olympics under one flag?
Well, at present, this cooperation between North and South Korea is a kind of limited time only event that is occurring around the Olympics. There's some powerful symbolism around the idea of coming into the stadium together under one flag. But the reality is that the two Koreas are facing off in a kind of confrontation. And at present, we have not seen signs that the inter-Korean dialogue has addressed issues beyond North Korea's participation in the Olympics.
Well, after that recent meeting at the DMZ between North and South Korea, some critics said the South Korean government was a bit too soft on the North. So what do you think?
Well, I think that the South Korean government certainly has an interest in trying to promote tension reduction both at the Olympics. North Korea's participation is a kind of insurance policy against any kind of disruption. And they have an interest in trying to lure North Korea into denuclearization talks with the United States. But that's going to be a very challenging task. And so the advantage they have is that they will have opportunities to meet with very high-level North Koreans in order to try to put this idea in their heads. But frankly, the direction that the North Korean government is on and the direction that Kim Jong-un has gone is directly opposite to that. And so the likelihood that they're going to succeed in convincing North Korea to join denuclearization talks with the United States, so far, we don't have any indications that that is going to happen.
So a bit of a carrot right now with the Olympics, maybe not for the long term, but the title of your recent book is South Korea at the Crossroads. Now, how is this a crossroads for them now compared to the past?
Well, for South Korea, increasingly, they are facing strategic challenges that both in terms of dealing with North Korea and in terms of dealing with the fact that they depend on China for economic growth while they depend on U.S. for security. The question of where South Korea can best position itself in order to maintain its prosperity is beginning to be an open question in the context of China's rise. And so I try to address that issue in the book. I come to the conclusion that at present, it's still in South Korea's interest to maintain a strong security relationship with the United States.
Well, do you see improved relations coming? How would that benefit the U.S.?
Improved relations. Right now, we have obstacles in the inter-Korean relationship and the South Korea-China relationship. in general terms, I think the United States can benefit from tension reduction, especially because it would require North Korea to turn around and go in a different direction rather than trying to threaten the United States with a nuclear strike. And in the context of the U.S.-China relationship, well, that's going to be very complex because the current administration, I think, is moving toward more of a position of rivalry with China. And increasingly, South Korea is going to find its choices squeezed in the context of potential rising tension between Beijing and Washington.
And President Trump has always said that China is the key, and publicly he tweets out comments critical of Kim Jong-un, and then he warns of fire and fury. But what do you see happening behind the scenes? How is U.S. policy any different from the past?
So the really significant development, in my view, under the Trump administration is that the United States has gone from asking China to cooperate on North Korea to essentially trying to compel China to cooperate on North Korea, and essentially telling China, North Korea is becoming a near and present danger to the United States. We will have to take actions against North Korea that might also be costly to Chinese interests, and you're just going to have to accept that. And so the main instrument by which to do that is something called secondary sanctions, where the U.S. Treasury can sanction Chinese companies that are doing business with North Korea. We've seen the beginnings of the use of that instrument under the Trump administration. And the question really is, how does the Trump administration lay that out, and how do the Chinese respond if the United States takes a much more aggressive role in essentially putting unilateral sanctions on Chinese entities that are frankly breaking UN Security Council resolutions and allowing North Korea, enabling North Korea to be a threat to the United States?
Well, those are the big question marks, aren't they? And I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on it. Scott Snyder from the Council on Foreign Relations, we thank you for your insights. Two memos released by Republicans on Capitol Hill, one from the House Intelligence Committee, another from the Senate Judiciary Committee, are rocking Washington. Do the once classified memos show collusion at the highest levels of the government against the Trump presidential campaign and now President Trump? Well, joining us is David Cay Johnston. He's author of the book, It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. And Jordan Sekulow is here from the American Center for Law and Justice. Let's start with David. David, you seem to think those memos are politics, not a real effort to expose political bias at the FBI and Justice Departments. So why, from your perspective, what's going on?
Well, this memo, as pointed out by a former CIA director, is a cherry-picked memo that the Democrats have said is completely misleading. Let's be clear about what was going on here. Donald Trump has been receiving money from Russians under very unusual circumstances that I write about in this book and in my prior book, The Making of Donald Trump, since 1983. And it was foreign governments, the Australians, the Dutch, and the English, who came to American counterintelligence and said, there appears to be a significant problem with contacts between people in the Trump campaign and the Russian government. I find it astonishing that the party of law and order, and I'm a registered Republican, is doing these things that tend to discredit the FBI without instead looking at what are the facts, and let's have public hearings the way we did, for instance, during Watergate.
Jordan, is this the cherry picking of information for political purposes and the discrediting of the FBI, or has the FBI discredited itself?
I think in a number of ways, the FBI leadership from the Obama administration that carried over into some of the Trump administration and the deputies, the top Washington folks, Gary, have discredited themselves. We're not talking about the entire FBI, the field offices, the agents who are out there risking their lives every single day. We're talking about Washington, D.C., FBI headquarters, if you will, the 7th floor of the FBI, the top of the top. And those officials, what we see from these memos, and it's not being disputed by the other side, was that a political campaign's paid-for opposition research was the basis of a FISA warrant and the basis of the evidence.
Mr. Johnston, you're an investigative journalist, so am I. And when I look at these memos, I see a law firm and company hired by the Clinton campaign to do opposition research against Trump. And then that research, without validation, was used by the FBI to spy on at least one American. Doesn't that bother you?
No, because what you said, if what you said was accurate, then I would say, yes, I'm very concerned. The original hiring of Fusion GPS, which is run by a former Wall Street Journal investigative reporter, was done by the Washington Free Beacon, which I think you and I would agree is a conservative Washington publication. Only later did a Democratic law firm then hire Fusion GPS. But what started the investigation, and it's clear from the memo that this is the case, was the tip from Australian diplomatic services who had had a conversation in which one of the Trump people disclosed involvement with Russians. And this confirms the reporting in the New York Times about what happened here.
Jordan, back to you. Did the House Intelligence Committee 4-page memo accurately detail what was in the more lengthy FISA document?
Well, I think what we will know is because we saw, unlike with the Republican memo, where it was a completely partisan vote in the House Intelligence Committee, every Republican, Gary, voted okay to release the Democrat memo that's now at the White House for a review. And what the White House has said is it's a more difficult memo to release publicly because it has more of the procedures and the methods that are classified that they don't want to release, that should not be released publicly, but that they are still going through that process. So there was not a single Republican voted against letting that memo go. So I think what we know is that the FBI tried to downplay through the Department of Justice when they filed their FISA request on Carter Page, this former Trump campaign official, that they tried to downplay through a footnote that this came from people who may be politically opposed. Let's not forget all of the unmasking that was requested by the Obama administration. I don't think for a minute any of this is unrelated, and it's all just kind of putting this giant puzzle together. And they're doing everything they can, Washington, to make this difficult for people. And so when a 3.5-page memo comes out that lays it out very clearly, they want to make it. They want to discredit that as much as possible because it becomes all too clear to the American people what was going on here. And it was wrong. And we need to restore the credibility of the FBI. We want the FBI to have credibility. We're not trying to take down the FBI. We want the FBI to have credibility as a nation's top law enforcement agency and focused on national security and fighting terrorism.
Yeah, I think I've heard some people say, maybe even your dad, that it's not about destroying the FBI, it's about saving it from corruption. So how about
That's exactly right.
How about some transparency here? Should we see the FISA warrant documents and a transcript of the arguments that were made to gain its approval?
You know, I think that will be up to, again, the Department of Justice and working with the new FBI, so there's new leadership there, and Congress working together. They could ultimately release that, depending on, again, is it releasable in the sense that could you take out the information that isn't appropriate?
Things that to you and me might appear to be insignificant. And I say this as someone who's exposed spies and foreign agents as a reporter. Things that to you and me may appear to be absolutely plain vanilla can be of enormous intelligence use to hostile governments, particularly the Kremlin. And let's keep in mind that the Kremlin had its emissary send an email in June of 2016 to Don Trump Jr. that in its language made it clear that the Russians were already interfering in the election. It said, as part of Russia and its government's support for your campaign, if you're running for president or your father is, and you get a foreign government offering help, it's a crime to accept such help, and there is only one rightful thing to do. You pick up the phone, you call the FBI, and you say, I need to speak to someone in counterintelligence. Donald Trump Jr. lied about this memo, these emails for a year. The White House has made 6 statements since then, which are internally inconsistent and contain what we now know to be a number of lies.
I'm not excusing lies, but it seems like there have been lies on the other side, on the part of the Democrats as well. Weren't there connections with the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian pro-Russian Ukrainians?
Yes, and the world is a very complicated place, but these are not moral equivalents.
in the Democrats' situation, they were paying Christopher Steele to go to Russia to get dirt from Russians. I mean, so in a sense, they're working with Russians right there. And that's one thing to judge politically whether you like that or not. It's another thing to say it's illegal. And so, again, I think you're talking about the moral equivalency. That's kind of up to the American people to decide whether they like that or not with their politicians. But if you actually go, I'm an attorney, and you go to law, the reason why no one really talks about collusion anymore is because there is no law against it, like that or not. So they move on to other issues. And again, I think what those other issues really are is about the government in Washington, D.C., and this includes Republicans and Democrats, by the way, but inside the agencies like the FBI, who want to protect their interest over the interest of the American people and the policies that the elected commander-in-chief and elected officials in our country who oversee the executive branch want to put in place.
David, what do you think should be done now? Another special prosecutor to look into these allegations? Maybe a commission against government corruption?
Well, I think what we should do is allow the special prosecutor to finish his work, and let's see what's in his report. What matters is what's in his report. Robert Mueller was a valorous officer in Vietnam. He was a federal judge. He was an FBI director under presidents, both Republican and Democrat, the second longest serving FBI director.
Special counsel Robert Mueller wants President Trump to testify on the Russia investigation. What do you think of former President Obama maybe also being asked to testify should that happen?
Well, this is one of those issues where President Obama it would be in trouble in this situation because he came out publicly to the press and declared, I never asked my attorney general, I never asked my FBI directors, this was before these text messages, about ongoing investigations. And then we get these text messages between Strzok and Page, who we know were people that were on Mueller's team. Page was there temporarily. Strzok was removed because we believe these text messages came to light that showed their anti-Trump bias. We don't have to go through all of that right now. But then we've got new messages that show that Page was telling Strzok, you're preparing talking points for Director Comey to go and brief the president, that's President Obama, on everything we're doing. Now, in September, that time period, that could include the Clinton investigation, because we know that even though it was announced that it was done, they were starting to say, oh, wait, there's more emails, there's more information, we may have to reopen this investigation and then inform Congress. But there was also a Russia investigation. How much of that had to do with the Trump investigation? So to me, it's this. As a president, I think you're the commander-in-chief, you're the head of these executive agencies. You can ask questions about investigations, you can get information. But if you start declaring that you never do that or you're never going to get involved, that's where I think the president's team is already in this mode where they're using liberal advocacy groups to say, well, he was just getting information about the Russian interference in our election. And by the way, they never came forward with that information. And how much of that was politically related? So I think, again, these text messages are just a tip of the iceberg.
And I suspect there will be more text messages and more memos to come. So, okay, David Cay Johnston, author and investigative journalist, and Jordan Sekulow, thank you both for joining us.
How many dating apps do you know?
Probably like 3 or 4.
Can you name all of them?
Tinder, Plenty of Fish. Actually, no, just 2. Okay.
Well, let's say POF, Plenty of Fish. So how do you know when you get on this social app, when you look at the candidates, that's the person God really had in mind for you?
I mean, I don't use them, so I don't really know what people think when they use them.
And what about Tinder? When you swipe, or when they swipe left or right, and how do you know that's the person, again, you know, you're supposed to be with one through God?
I don't know what they're thinking. I don't use those sites.
I mean, I don't know. You don't know till you meet them, I guess.
Well, I can't really answer that question because I've really never met people on social media like that. I've been here all my life, so the people that I know are the people that I know at church.
Okay.
Match, eHarmony. That's a good question. I guess you would have to pray on it, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
I've never used Tinder, so I wouldn't know that. I found my boyfriend, like, just met him the normal way.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I have to meet the person in person to actually know if I like them.
Because I'm actually a widow and I just started dating. I guess kind of like not so much looks, but what they put in their little story. You know, if they say, hey, I'm looking for a one-night stand, swipe to the left.
Valentine's Day, it's a time for love. Here in the United States, this year, consumers will spend more than $18 billion celebrating Valentine's Day. And ladies, $5 billion of that will be spent on jewelry. Yes, jewelry, not candy or flowers. Overall, the average male will spend about $200 on their sweetheart. The average female, $100. And guys, that doesn't quite seem fair now, does it, in a day and age of feminism and equal rights? But anyway, get this. As many as 9 million marriage proposals are expected. So why do we celebrate anyway? It's all because of St. Valentine. He was a martyred Roman priest who advanced Christianity during the 3rd century. Some say he was involved in the miraculous healing of a judge's blind daughter. Another account says he healed the deaf daughter of a jailer. Regardless, he was jailed for proselytizing and for illegally conducting Christian marriages. For that, he was beheaded. Now, the Apostle John said in his Gospel, chapter 15, verse 13, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." Well, St. Valentine certainly did that. He was a man who loved others. And it's all about love. And remember this one from the Beatles movie Yellow Submarine? It was first released in 1968. How many Beatle fans have played that song over and over? But more than 1900 years before the birth of the Beatles, God so loved the world that he sent his son to save us. And Jesus gave us a new commandment. In John 13:34, he said, "Love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another." So how do we know if someone truly loves us? In his first letter to the Corinthians, the Apostle Paul said this about love. In chapter 13, verses 4 through 7, "Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." And 6 verses later, Paul talked of 3 things: faith, hope, and love. He said the greatest of these is love. So tell someone close to you that you love them. Show others the same love God has for us, not just on Valentine's Day, but every day. Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.